because we want to talk about what these movies might reveal to us about the late Holy Father.
A boy was inspired to do great things by a movie that he saw as a child. A young man was inspired to reach out to people who most needed the physician by a movie that he saw as a young man. And then in his 50s, a man who was going to be Pope was inspired that what you do for others and how you please others is the greatest joy of all. And that impacted him and the church as well.
Welcome to the Catholic Film Club, where we talk craft and conscience at the movies. I'm Michael Coy, and I'm joined today by Tom Hoops, writer in residence here at Benedictine College, and...
In Atchison, Kansas.
In Atchison, Kansas, no less. Thanks for coming, Tom.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Well, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about Pope Francis's favorite films to honor the late Holy Father. And he was actually, I think, outwardly more of a film fan than some of our more recent popes. Would you agree with that?
Well, I don't know about the recent popes. I know that John Paul II had a lot of favorite films as well. I'm not sure what Benedict XVI's filmography was, if you can say that.
Well, what I remember when Francis was first elected pope is that he really talked up one of the films we're going to talk about, STRADA, and it inspired me to watch the film, and I just really enjoyed it. So I always had that in the back of my mind, like, oh, okay, this is a guy that appreciates the finer things. And
yeah, and he spoke about film several times significantly in his pontificate. Once in his opening interview that was in America magazine. He also spoke off the cuff several times about film. And then in his autobiography, which just came out this year, called Hope, which I just finished and is really good, he spoke about how his parents brought him to the neighborhood theater, kind of introduced him to the art of film. They introduced him to art in general and included film in that introduction. And he said that he watched all of Rossellini's films, that came out when he was there. And I discovered that you can look up on IMDb when films were released in Argentina or any other country, or most other countries at any rate. And so I wrote an article about this, going through the films that came out at various points in his life and how they affected, I'm imagining here how that could have, the Rome Open City could have affected him as a child, and another one later, and another one later. Yeah,
I love that article. We'll link to it below. And the movies that we're going to be talking about today are Rome Open City, which came out in 1945. It's an Italian neo-realist film. La Strada, directed by Federico Fellini, came out in 1954. And Babette's Feast, which I had never seen before this, and was very happy to view too. That's a Danish film from 1987.
Wow, you never saw Babette's Feast?
Never saw it before. And I'll tell you, I had a very special first viewing, which I'll tell you about later.
Oh, good, okay.
But I think what the first thing is because we want to talk about what these movies might reveal to us about the late Holy Father. And I think what they reveal to us is that he was like a fan of very just boring, depressing movies.
Or you could say...
And so am I.
Or you could say that it shows that he has very good taste in movies and that he wasn't easily titillated by movies and he wasn't looking for the kind of fare that reveals itself to you on its first watch.
That's what I meant to say. And that's I was speaking in jest, Tom.
All right.
Okay, but thanks for joining us here. I also thought it would be good because you're the author of What Did Pope Francis Really Say?
Exactly, yeah.
And so I thought we would talk about what did Pope Francis really watch?
The question suggests itself, doesn't it? What Pope Francis really said, which, by the way, is newly available on Audible.
Hey now.
So, for what that's worth.
Read by the author?
No, it's read by some guy, and don't look up the other stuff he's read. He's a good reader, though.
My goodness. I will not look that up. I promise. It seems that our commentary on Conclave is more relevant than ever, by the way. Your article on commenting on the movie Conclave has like skyrocketed in views so far.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of attention for that. A lot of people are watching the movie thinking this must be what a conclave is really like. And they're right in some respects, but significantly not right in other respects. So that's a great one to check out if you haven't seen it. The Kansas City Star actually reached out to us to interview us about the movie because of the podcast and the article and all the rest of it.
Yeah, I thought that was a surprisingly detailed article. I really enjoyed it. So that was you and a Vatican insider whose name I can't remember at this moment. But it was really, really fascinating. So as I just want to say direct to camera, as everyone who defends Conclave tells me over the YouTube comments, it's not a documentary. Although apparently it's incredibly well researched.
It might as well have been a documentary.
Absolutely.
Which is also true of our first film.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into Rome Open City. And I just want to talk about in these movies, because we could do a whole episode on each of these, a whole like film club feature on each of these. So I just want to, introduce what the movie is, say what Pope Francis thought about it, get into the moments of the film that stuck out to us, and say what it says about Pope Francis himself. Could you describe Rome Open City for someone who hasn't seen it?
Well, the reason I say that it's practically a documentary is that I think the way it was funded was from a wealthy Italian who wanted Roberto Rossellini to create a documentary about what had just happened. And what had just happened was that Rome had been occupied by the Nazis, who had left weeks before this movie began production. He argued that instead of doing a documentary, I want to do this dramatic feature, and I guess she agreed. But it was done on the fly. He had to find little bits and pieces of what he needed in terms of film technology that wasn't available right after the Nazis left. And the way he handled those problems became kind of the basis for the neo-realist movement in Italian film, where films became much grittier, much more real. Okay, but Rome Open City. So the term open city, I think, is very suggestive and very evocative, because what you do is, if your city is about to get occupied, you can either declare yourself an open city, which means we're not going to fight back, or you can not do so. If you do not do so, then the occupier comes in guns blazing and leaves your town in rubble. So Rome chose to be an open city, and it's a real kind of strange term, because on the one hand, you're saving lives by being an open city. On the other hand, you're leaving yourself vulnerable to another to take over. And the story that Rossellini follows, the stories he follows, show various characters. And I was actually watching it with my 12-year-old son, and we were trying to figure out, well, wait a second, what just happened? And, who is this? And where did that guy go? But they all kind of coalesce in the end into one story with three very powerful images of opposition to the Nazis. But the main character, I suppose, that emerges from this is a priest who was played by a very famous at the time Italian comic author called Aldo Fabrizi. And he kind of becomes sort of the hero of this tale, along with a heroine and another hero.
That's the thing that stands out to me is this beautiful portrayal of a priest. I think, how can you, it's one of the best portrayals of a priest, of what it means to be a priest, and a priest who is fighting to be good. It doesn't seem like he is born good. He's fighting to be good and just, even as he is an oppressed person. He is in an occupied city, and yet he asks everything of himself. Right. It was really tremendous.
So the film is made as the Nazis have just left Rome, but it's set as the Nazis are just coming into Rome. So there's still an active resistance. The main characters we follow are resisting the Nazis. And there's a harrowing torture scene that shocked me that was actually a thing in 1945, that they would show this extensive torture scene. There's a pregnant woman who gets shot. There's this execution scene of a priest. So it really goes there in terms of the horrors of war. And I think what Pope Francis took from it is seeing the heroic priest figure. And there's a beautiful scene where he's cradling a dying woman in his arms, almost like a reverse Pietà. Mm-hmm. And then there's then his execution scene, which is kind of reminiscent of The Scarlet and the Black, if you've seen that. In fact, I bet it quotes this movie. But But then the last shot are children walking away they were watching this execution through a chain link fence, and you see them walking away and you feel the change that's occurred in them. And I feel like I can feel the change which occurred in the boy, Pope Francis, watching this torture scene and then this death of this priest, which must have been overwhelming. And all his life, he's wanted to, well, starting at age 16, he's wanted to be a priest and wanted to be heroic, and actually literally did heroic things when it became his turn to protect political activists, political people who were under threat for political reasons in Argentina.
Really? What remind me what that was, what he did?
Well, it was the time of the disappearing of people, and there were folks who needed to get out of Argentina, get through Argentina, and he kind of put himself on the line, dressing these people up as seminarians, bringing them to a retreat and claiming that they were retreatants, and then smuggling them out of the country. It really is a terrific story on its own. Someday somebody will make that movie, because that's astonishing, the things that he did. And I think it all comes down to this priest that he saw, who, and I quote in my article, he said, "Ana Magnani and Aldo Fabrizi were our teachers on fighting, on hope, on wisdom." So he learned from these people on the screen how to bring good out of even the gravest evil.
What did your son think of it?
Well, he's 12 and he's not a very talkative guy.
Okay.
So he didn't have much to say about it. But what I've learned as a dad is that maybe I'll find out 5-10 years from now what he thought of it. So ask me again 5 or 10 years from now.
Okay, I will do that. But you're talking about the priest, and he, there are many characters in this, but he is the one who emerges as the hero, as the central hero. And he has so many beautiful things to say. And when he's talking with this pregnant lady, Anna, Pina is the character, Anna is the actor. When he's talking with her and she's asking the things that anyone would ask, she's asking how, life keeps getting harder, doesn't Christ see us? And he says to her that he hears this all the time, but he asks, are we sure that we don't deserve the scourge? Have we always lived according to God's laws? We never think of changing our ways. And we have much to be forgiven for. And I really think that's a powerful moment of, seeking an ultimate truth, of just like, you are not wiped away of your sins if you are sinned against, you can't be sinned against, but if you are wronged. And this priest throughout the film asks so much of himself, even when in a moment of righteous anger, he says what the Nazis deserve to hear about themselves, that they will be smote, basically. He steps back and asks, what have I said and what have I done? It's a beautiful character, right. Powerful to see that.
So I think the challenge of the film goes two different ways. One, it's challenging people who are facing suffering to say, okay, well, how have I lived? But secondly, I think he's challenging us to see in the suffering of a communist, an unmarried pregnant woman who has not yet gone to confession. That would have hurt even more for the original audience, and it should hurt us too. She's made elaborate plans to get to confession, and she doesn't get to because she gets gunned down by the Nazis. Now, of course, God has his ways of providing mercy apart from the sacraments, but that was meant to be a gut punch, and it was. But seeing the beauty in these characters who are not picture perfect plaster saints. So both recognizing that we have sinned and that some suffering to some degree is coming to us. And on the other hand, seeing that there's great moral beauty in even people who aren't following the typical mold.
Yeah, that image of her, and I don't think that's, and that image of her being gunned down is actually the first thing I ever saw of the movie, because many of these films I was introduced to by Martin Scorsese, who was a friend of Pope Francis and was inspired by him tremendously in his documentary about his journey through Italian cinema called My Voyage to Italy, which I recommend anyone can try to find. It's really beautiful. And I think when I see this movie, I it's the thing he's quoted the least about, but I think it reveals so much about what Pope Francis, there's an immediacy to the film, which the more I read from Pope Francis, the more I see him as someone urgently wanting to connect to the flock. And, there's that famous line, I want the priest to smell like their sheep. You see that in this priest. And then you see it in the opposite in the main Nazi that's portrayed, Major Bergman, when he says he can see the whole city without leaving his office. He can look through these photos and the words that his spies have given him, and he can see all of Rome, but of course he doesn't see it at all.
Right. So that's one thing that was really kind of striking about the movie, is that the other characters all exist in this world where they're going from room to room. There's always children running around. It's filled with life and motion and activity. But all the Nazi scenes are in, it seems like a 3-room suite, where the torture is happening here, and the people are drinking and doing drugs here, and the Nazi is taking business meetings here, which is clearly not realistic, but also clearly meant to show us kind of the claustrophobic world that these Nazis live in, and the fact that they are living with knowledge of the pain that they're causing. And without going into details, they intentionally code the Nazis as being guilty of every form of depravity, including sexual depravity or sexual disorder at any rate, including drug taking and just luxuriating while people are dying in the next room. It's propagandistic in a sense, but it's really showing you viscerally with cinematic images that the bad guys are really bad.
Yeah, but one of them, they seem to understand that. There's one character, Hartman, who says, who seems to understand that the Nazi lie is a lie, and yet he goes on living it anyway. He goes on perpetrating these crimes, even though he knows that he will, unless he repents, I suppose, that he's completely damned for what he's been doing.
Yeah, he's a fascinating character because he's just sort of this cynical gadfly who's telling the truth. He's a truth teller, but a fool, which we'll see more of in today. But there's these fascinating little scenes that are there's the scene where the priest is in a store. There's a statue of a saint and a statue of Venus who's naked.
It's a funny
and
scene.
He tries to position the saint so that he doesn't have to be looking at the naked lady. It's just, there's these strange little humorous touches when you don't expect them, that gives the movie, I think it gives its punch a little bit even more power because of the contrast.
There's one that stands out to me that it was humorous, but then also kind of disgusting and showed depravity, where the Nazis are rounding up a gaggle of villagers to find one of these resistance fighters. And one Nazi just looks up the dresses of some of the villagers that they've gathered, and it's shot humorously, but it hit home so viscerally how disgusting that is to control people and then to take advantage of them in that way. It was.
I thought you were going to talk about the awesome scene where the priest is trying to hide the guns from the Nazis who are looking through the apartment building.
Oh, okay.
So a man on his sickbed pretends to be dead, and the priest pretends to be giving him last rites. But what he's really done is hid a bunch of guns under his blanket. Anyway, it's a fascinating movie with nice touches. And Rossellini, this is early in his career, I suppose.
Yeah.
And in fact, the movies he had done before were kind of propaganda for the bad guys almost. But this opens up into the neo-realism that he was the founder of, that then became his great contribution to cinema.
La Strada. Rome Open City was written by Federico Fellini, and this movie was written and directed by Federico Fellini. And this is the movie that I think Pope Francis has conclusively called his favorite film.
He said that there were scenes he'll never forget from Rome Open City. And that's what makes me picture the 10-year-old boy watching this movie and having his life changed, his trajectory of life changed. But he says of La Strada that he watched it when he was 18, which is right after he had first discovered his vocation to the priesthood, which he really did discover in a pretty specific way. What happened is he went into a confessional. He was walking by a church on the way to a meeting, and he did not have a need to go to confession. He suddenly felt this overwhelming desire to go to confession. He went into the confessional and had a very personal, intimate experience of Jesus Christ, who Catholics believe is present in each of the sacraments. So it's him who's forgiving you in the confessional. He had this very visceral experience of Jesus Christ, and discovered that he was supposed to be a priest in the confessional. So this is all swirling around his mind when he sees this movie, La Strada. I don't know if he watched this when it was his parents or not. It would have been in the same neighborhood movie theater when he was 18. And it really moved him and changed his trajectory once again.
And this movie is about a very lowly, almost peasant woman named Jill Samina who decides to. It's kind of a convoluted setup.
It's set up that this Zampano, this circus strongman, pays his family to acquire her as a companion / mistress / wife. It's kind of unclear. And he had some relationship with her older sister.
It seemed that she's taken the older sister's place in a way.
So this strong man takes this woman to be his paramour / assistant. At least that's implied, I suppose. But I heard of somebody compared her to a cross between Mickey Mouse and Charlie Chaplin.
She has this incredibly expressive face that, and it's commented on in the movie. It's a part of the story in a way, but it is like you're watching a cartoon character amongst this pretty realistic scenario.
And she's simple-minded to some degree. It's not made explicit just how much she understands of what's going on. Her understanding is a bit impaired. Children are attracted to this person. She enters the circus life, and the Communist Party of the time was offended by the film because she enters this life and embraces it. She seems to be okay with this oppression of herself, which is probably problematic for feminists today. But she sees that she will be the companion of this man, and she sees good in it, okay? Meanwhile, the story shows you clearly that she's being oppressed and that she's being mistreated, and this man is rough and he's not sympathetic at all. And yet she dedicates herself to him, and the La Strada means the road. So it's a road movie where they're traveling from place to place. And it's astonishing. She has 2 or 3 opportunities where she can leave him, and she chooses to stay. So I think Fellini wants you to know she's doing this by choice. In fact, my daughter wrote a paper for the symposium here at Benedictine College in which she mentioned La Strada and a couple other examples of women who choose in a situation which would be called oppressive, and yet beauty comes from it, and dignity comes from it. That's sort of what happens here. I was reminded I'm not the world's, I like U2 a lot, okay? I'm not the world's biggest U2 fan. But there's this song called Grace on one of their albums, which is a beautiful song, but the line from it is, grace makes beauty out of ugly things. And I kept thinking about that during Rome Open City, this movie as well. This ugliness in the world, grace somehow knits into, because what happens is that, without spoiling the ending, I guess we'll end up spoiling the ending directly, but her innocent service of Zampano. I'm saying Zampano.
I think Zampano's right.
Zampano, okay. Her innocent service of him is such that it eventually changes him, but only because he destroys that innocence by a crime he commits that she witnesses. Mm-hmm. And he sees what that does to her, and they end up separating, and it's only years later that he realizes that this woman's goodness and innocence was the most valuable thing he ever had, and that he lost it. And it just ends with this very sad scene of regret.
And that scene, that image is what stuck with me all these years over the course of Francis's entire pontificate. So, and to revisit the film, I was glad that I did, because it filled in the gaps. I feel like I wasn't really old enough to understand or appreciate what was being said here. When I watched the movie and you're talking about the sacrifice that Gelsomina takes, all of these characters seem to be in one way or the other like an embodiment of the Beatitudes. And with her, it's very much the poor in spirit. And you're talking about someone who is giving, the contrast, basically, where, and it reminded me very much of a story by Flannery O'Connor, actually. It seemed to have that same rhythm of gazing directly at the dregs of society in a way, showing an offer of grace that's refused, but how that can, in a way, be sanctifying. A lot of these movies, really all three of the movies that we're talking about, the main characters seem to be sanctified through their willingness to take on suffering in a way, for what is good. Because the reason that Gelsomina stays is kind of after a conversation she has with another circus performer named Il Matto, who has a speech that really hit Pope Francis, and he spoke about it directly several times, about a pebble having a purpose. Do you remember this scene?
Absolutely. They call it the parable of the pebble when people talk about this movie.
Yeah, and and Pope Francis, for his part, seems to take that into his pontificate. And when Matto says it to Gelsomina, he says, "You little pebble, you have a sense in this life." And when he was addressing St. Peter's Square during, I believe it was a solemnity of Saints Peter and Paul, he said this. He says, "This is all in Peter, the strength of the rock, the reliability of the stone, and the littleness of a simple pebble." And finally later on, he says, "Finally thinking of the pebble, are we aware of our littleness? And above all, in our weakness, do we entrust ourselves to the Lord, who accomplishes great things through those who are humble and sincere."
Right.
And it seems that this did carry forth in the way that he thought, and the way that Holy Spirit he allowed to move through him.
Yeah, and he clearly throughout his pontificate had this direction toward the peripheries, right? And you can think of that what you will, but the reason he was chosen in the conclave was that he gave this speech during the general congregations before the conclave, where he spoke about how the next pope should be somebody who isn't a woman. The church is a woman, is feminine, isn't like bent in on herself, kind of like navel gazing and looking at herself, but somebody who goes out to the peripheries and reaches the poorest of the poor and the people who you wouldn't expect. And that was kind of the stated purpose, the kind of the mission statement of his pontificate, was to go out to the peripheries and meet people where they are and help them come to the fullness of Catholic faith.
And that, I think, relates directly to the next movie that we're going to talk about, which is, we're talking about another woman who dedicates herself to service, and that's Babette's Feast. Babette's Feast actually is a much more complicated, intricate plot than you might expect if you just heard about this movie about someone serving dinner. But my little log line that I made for the film is: a French servant wins the lottery and serves a decadent meal to her Puritan Danish town. Does that describe it well enough, you think?
Okay, I'm going to push back on the word decadent. I would say extravagant.
Extravagant. Okay.
Grace-filled, not decaying.
There we go.
Corrupted.
And this, we forgot to mention, this movie won Best Foreign Language Film at the Academy Awards. So did La Strada. Rome Open City won the Palme freaking d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. So we're dealing with heavy hitters here, people.
For once.
Now, this is the first time I'd seen Babette's Feast, actually. It's kind of become a staple, I've noticed. I don't know if it's just in Atchison or if it's in all Catholic circles.
Okay, so I was around in the 80s, man.
Okay, man. All right, here we go.
I was at a Catholic college, and the Catholic intelligentsia from the very beginning embraced this movie and talked about how Eucharistic it was. And my shtick became that I hated Babette's Feast, okay? Because it was cool to be the one Catholic smart guy who didn't like. And I said, okay, it's Eucharistic because there's a meal, but literally the thing that's different about the Eucharist is that it's not a meal. It's the body and the bread and wine becoming the body and blood of Christ. It's different in kind from every other meal, right? It's like saying, my love for you is marital. Like, that's gross. Don't say that. Only say that to your wife, right?
Yeah.
So that was my shtick. And I kind of stuck to my guns, and I would have the anti-Babette's Feast conversation. And I actually only rewatched it finally for this podcast. My heart had been melted a little bit. Bishop Barron, in his book on the Eucharist, has basically a whole chapter dedicated to Babette's Feast. And I understood the degree to which this woman poured herself into this meal. It was her only money. Okay, so let's set this up a little bit. This is a hardcore Puritan, they call it Lutheran, and so it's a hardcore Puritan cult, or cult in the old style sense of the word, not necessarily creepy cult, but dedicated to a figure. This figure is the father of two daughters. They're the most beautiful women in town or anywhere
on
nearby.
This Danish island.
On this Danish island. And so they're doted on by all. He names them Martina and Philippa.
That's right.
After two early Lutherans, Martin Luther and Philip, somebody. And all the guys in town try to sit in the front pew to be near these two women. And two suitors come to visit them. One is he French captain?
He's a captain. I believe he is French.
Yeah,
yes.
Sure. He's a French captain. And he is entranced by one of the daughters, and that doesn't work out. And then next, this guy named Papin comes, and he's entranced by the other daughter and wants to make her a great opera singer, a little bit creepily. And then he's rejected. And so they grow up having all their suitors rejected in this Puritan cult that's against the Puritan. A cult sounds so derogatory, and they don't mean. The group in the movie is not. They're shown to be hardcore, but I don't think they're shown to be creepy and weird.
Well, they're seen to be. I don't know. It seems like what secular people think every religious person seemed like. It didn't seem very. I don't know. The father is not doing anything other than what a good Lutheran would do, I suppose. When I think of a cult, I think of someone using the minds of other people to like a base sexual advantage or something, but he just seems to be like,
right.
So maybe it is a cult, but it seems like a benign cult.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
I don't know.
But he's very intense. What happens is that Babette shows up. She is a political exile from Paris. She has lost her husband and her son, and she wants to just be the servant of this family. And she ends up being the servant of the family, and she ends up being a darn good servant. She saves them money. They have very poor fare in terms of what they feed to the poor and the sick, but she makes it cheaper and she makes it better. The iconic picture of her with a sunset or sunrise behind her, I think is her going out to find herbs to make this stuff taste better. She eventually wins the lottery, and she decides to spend it all on one big feast. And she has to beg Martina and Philippa to give her the permission to do so. And they do. And then she buys these incredible ingredients, including a live turtle that she's going to kill and turn into turtle soup. And just it takes like a Eucharistic procession, if you can say that, of all these ingredients from the sea that she brings to create this impressive meal, including wine and champagne and after dinner liqueurs. And the people simultaneously see this happening. They say, this is witchcraft. They decide that they're going to not say anything at all about the meal. They're not going to react positively to it, and they're going to keep exhorting each other to look toward heavenly goods while they eat it. But the guy who one of them had, because of the machinate, okay, we won't go into all of it.
The funny thing about this meal is that first it's comic because they clearly are really liking this meal and they've vowed to not say a single thing about it. The general who is visiting, and General Lawrence.
He was the suitor early in the early in the movie, and now he's come back as a general, no longer as a suitor.
This plot is so much more complicated than these other two movies that we're talking about, interestingly. But it's important to outline it because it kind of leads up to the entire punchline of the entire film.
Well, but it's a very brief short story. So I actually got a Wes Anderson vibe from this movie.
Interesting.
Because it feels like a storybook movie.
Right.
Like a Wes Anderson story. There's almost a symmetry since you're talking about two blonde-haired twins in this gray town. And it's very storybook, and it feels like Once Upon a Time. So it feels a little unreal, but I think it works.
Vignettes within the larger story.
Right.
But the thing that does seem to come out of it, which I thought was interesting, because you could see it at first as like kind of dunking on these Puritans. But what does happen positively is that because they're not giving in to their passions and how much they clearly love this meal, what they are doing is they are allowing the sort of the joy of this, you could say, artistic culinary creation kind of move through them and inspire gratitude and forgiveness and for the people around them, where beforehand it was shown that they were backbiting and getting very just sort of so annoyed with each other after being around each other so long. They each had this list of grievances. But what you find is that it's there's something purifying about this experience, and I think that's a beautiful thing about it. And I think that Pope Francis saw something in that as well.
So I thoroughly enjoyed the movie this time that I watched it. For some reason, I had the impression that it was drab and overdid the drabness and then overdid the extravagance of the meal, and then people calling it Eucharistic drove me crazy. But this time it did have a very lighter touch than I remembered. The Wes Anderson vibe is real there. And the way the plot all comes together in the end, I think is brilliantly done. And then the final line, which is what Pope Francis is talking about, which you probably found by now.
You go ahead.
No, you do it.
No, you do it because I didn't find it.
Oh, okay. So he likes that after she's poured herself out for these two sisters and this meal for the whole town, and they had been very wary of this meal. They're now able to say, "Oh, how you will delight the angels," and he really latched on. He spoke about that in his autobiography and also in Amoris Laetitia. He mentions it, where he says that the most intense joys arise from giving pleasure to others, and that's what he got from the movie. Which I like that lesson better. The Eucharistic lesson, I'm coming to terms with.
I apologize for all those people that said this Eucharistic thing to you. I must be kind of dumb because I didn't. I got a little bit of liturgical vibes out of it, I suppose, but they kind of melted away.
Bishop
as
Barry
I
makes the
watched
case very well in his book, so I'm on board with it. But I'm not going to make it my own or anything like that.
Well, he says the most intense joys in life arise when we're able to elicit joy in others, and I think, and then the ending bears that out. I wonder if part of my reason for enjoying it so much. So I'd heard about this movie for years and years and years. And, especially about how beautiful the cinematography was and the portrayal of the food and everything. It just looks so wonderful. So I decided that I would first experience this on an upload of an old cruddy VHS tape with Spanish subtitles, dubbed in English.
Oh, good.
Which is probably the way Pope Francis first saw it.
Actually, well,
he probably uploaded this himself. I think.
Bet he did. Yeah.
I can see him with ripping the disc and putting it on YouTube. And I think through that, in that very Puritan way, I was able to clear away the dross, the decadence of the whole meal, and really get to the meat of the thing, the protein.
Okay, I like that. So one thing I think that all three of these movies have in common is that they are all parables. Mm-hmm. So the first one, whenever you see a pregnant bride, she was about to be married and she was pregnant. Whenever you see, that's a symbol, and she's shot down by the bad guys, and you see a young man, as he's beginning his life, shot down. You see a priest shot down. These are symbols of religiosity, of heroism, of femininity. So the Rome Open City has a parable-like quality to it. And then you see directly in La Strada, one guy is called the Fool, and he's an acrobat who does amazing things. The other guy is literally a strong man. I mean, that's his job, and he's also the epitome that describes his character, right? But kind of a false strong man in both areas of his life. And how do they interact with a simple-minded, sad clown? So you're dealing in archetypes in La Strada also. And in this one, you have the military man and the man of art from Paris, and you have the woman of, she turns out to be a great famous chef, but she's at the service of this small village. Mm-hmm. So it takes these archetypal characters and kind of focuses them into these little plots where you see, well, how does art interact with war, during in the midst of religion, mm-hmm. You're dealing with these philosophical issues as well as the stories themselves.
Well, what I see in all of them is the real purpose of art, not art for its own sake, but for the sake of bringing out the goodness in life and illuminating that for someone so that they can take it out into the world. I think what we see from these movies is that Pope Francis, the reason they're his favorite, because it doesn't seem like he's just like a major cinephile or something, but they did affect him in a way where he wrote about them in his autobiography, as you said, and incorporated the lessons and used their language to act out what moved him in his heart, how God was speaking through him in a way. And that's what happens during Babette's feast, during the feast itself. That's what happens to when Gelsomina gives herself over to what she understands as a life of suffering. I mean, we've described her as naive, but she does know that she's being harmed in La Strada. She does understand that Zampano is a bad man, and she's given those opportunities, like you said, to throw it aside, but she doesn't. And then, as I was saying before, this priest, Don Pietro in Rome Open City, he has every opportunity to even in his own heart hate, and he even refuses to hate. His last words are "forgive them," right? And it's and so what I see there is just a recognition that creativity and art, it's more than about more than pleasure. It's about what it can elicit from the human being. And I think that's beautiful. I think what I see is that Pope Francis's pontificate is even inspiring the great filmmaker Scorsese, who I mentioned earlier. He's written a film about the life of Jesus based on Pope Francis's words or inspired by Pope Francis. that's been canceled a few times. We'll see if it comes out. And if it doesn't, that's probably just...
It's probably just as well.
It's probably just as well. I'm a little nervous about that. I was kind of happy that it was canceled because it's everything about it seemed like, oh, this seems wrong. So maybe if it
that's the cloak of charity right there.
It is. It's but I think it does speak to the impact of art and the impact that a life can have on art.
Well, and here on the Catholic Film Club, specifically of how the art of film can impact people. This is, a boy was inspired to do great things by a movie that he saw as a child. A young man was inspired to reach out to people who most needed the physician by a movie that he saw as a young man. And then in his 50s, a man who was going to be Pope was inspired that what you do for others and how you please others is the greatest joy of all. And that impacted him and the church as well.
Yeah, and I wanted to just end on a couple of words that Pope Francis said to a group of young people in I believe it was 2024, to create with the same style with which God made the world, the style of gratuitousness, which surpasses the logic of I do in order to have and I work in order to earn. And he said, I entrust you with these dreams as an elderly man who is thrilled to see our young faces. And I think of how much more thrilled Jesus is to look at you, he who always has a young heart and has called young people to follow him.
And those words could be the motto of Babette,
Gelsomina,
and also the priest. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So all three beautiful films, even with Babette and its VHS master, which
you didn't have to do it that way. They have it on Prime.
Well, they're also on other services. They're all on Max, but I don't have Max. So go check it out there. Like I said, he uploaded it himself probably. So I wanted to pay tribute to the way that he probably saw it.
Maybe he uploaded the version you saw.
That's what I was saying. I think I see his fingerprints on this. So I wanted to say, Tom, thanks for joining us on the Catholic Film Club again and going over these movies, even though you didn't like Babette very much when you were a kid, but
no, it was great to be here, and it was great to kind of be forced to watch these three movies, which I wouldn't have otherwise. But I would highly recommend that others not wait to be forced to watch them, but just check them out. Yeah, absolutely. And we will be here next week. My name is Michael Coy. We continue to pray for the repose of the soul of the Holy Father and for the new Pope on the horizon. This is the Catholic Film Club, brought to you by Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas. God bless.